Hello, my name is Michael Reese. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking to a number of individuals, interviewing them, and all of them come from a different background, have a variety of experiences in music and education, in the hopes of learning a lot, but also covering some important 21st century topics in music education and for educators in general. Joining us today is Phil Showalter to talk about how to design and implement a visual program for young high school musicians, helping them understand how to move in a consistent and efficient way that doesn't get in the way of their visual performance or musical performance. But before we get started, Phil, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get started in music? How did you end up where you are now?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Michael. Well, you get to know my start with at least marching side of music. Got started really in eighth grade doing some front ensemble stuff, but yeah, did like everybody else, started with high school marching band. I was fortunate to be in a program that was taught by people with some drum corps experience. Had a history of some individuals who marched drum corps consistently, went to DCI and Bands of America shows. I got a lot of exposure to some of the top level groups. And so it played a heavy role and heavy influence on, what I was looking to do in the future. And even actually attended a, clinic at the Blue Coats. Actually, I think one of the first years they had the Blue Way clinic. I went to that and kind of, if anything, confirmed that, I wanted to take those next steps in both music education, but then also pursuing a drum corps experience as well. So, then went to college at Ohio University to study music education, trumpet as my primary instrument. I was a part of the Ohio University Marching 110, so I got the competitive corps style high school experience, and then also the high stepping football game, dancing, show style experience as well. And then in 2014, I had the great fortune of marching with the Blue Coats Drum and Bugle Corps. I had Mike Fanning was the visual caption head. That was actually his first year as the visual caption head of Blue Coats. And it was really part of a pretty big culture change in the visual program there. One of the most obvious ones was going from the toe down technique they used in 2012 and 2013 to the more traditional toe up, straight leg marching technique. But even just in the way that we handled our visual responsibilities, it definitely, even though it was my first year there, you could kind of tell amongst the veterans and amongst the rest of the staff that had been there for a couple of years that this was a change from what they had done before. There was a real push for individual responsibility for dots. A couple dot tests here and there, but really just knowing your dots and knowing what your responsibilities were, making sure that you did everything at the highest level every rep. There was, Mike was not going to let you slack off on any reps, basically. And that was also a an opportunity. Like I learned many skills I didn't necessarily learn in a high school or college setting, particularly in movement, particularly with ballet and dance. The first time I ever did a plie was at January camp. So yeah, it's a little nerve wracking being in the high pressure audition situation and learning a brand new skill that I had never even considered doing it in marching bands. So that definitely shaped a lot of my performance experience. And it was after that season, I definitely knew I wanted to keep pursuing involvement in drum corps and working with marching bands that worked in that style. So then fast forward to 2015, I got an opportunity to teach with the Blue Knights Drum and Bugle Corps in Denver. Neil Atkinson was the visual caption head then. And I got the opportunity to do that because I tagged along with my friend Kyle Marks to a couple of rehearsals at Northmont High School over near Dayton. He was kind of going there back and forth in the fall to tech their marching band because he had marched under Neil when he was at Madison Scouts and then was getting ready to teach with him that summer. So I got a chance to know Neil, kind of show a little bit of my teaching abilities, and get to know a few other people that were going to be on the visual staff that summer. And so when an opening came up, Kyle encouraged me to reach out to Neil and let him know my interest, and that was a good opportunity for me to kind of make that transition from performer to teacher. getting an understanding of not just how to how to do the things, but how to teach them and what mechanics performers needed to know. Especially getting to work with some really top level dance and movement instructors, getting to see, not just them choreographing things, but actually teaching the members the functionality of it as well. And I felt much more like a student in some of those settings than a teacher, which was perfect for me because, like I said, I hadn't gotten those skills outside of doing it the 1 year at Blue Coats. So it was an opportunity for me to figure out, all right, how do I communicate that to a student? Um, and then the next year, I got a call from Mike Fanning about coming back to Blue Coats and being on the visual staff there, and have worked with Mike Fanning and Jared Huntley, and worked with a lot of the staff members that taught me, both brass and visually. I've also gotten the great fortune to be part of some great shows. I mean, obviously the 2016 championship, but even in shows like the 2018 Session 44, the 2019 Beatles show, doing the um, Ripson Revelations this year, and even really like 2017 was, it was a tough year, but it was a great year of growth and a great year of like learning about what we wanted to see from a Blue Coat drum and bugle corps. So being a part of those shows, and being around that design team definitely pushed me as an instructor. It's forced me to build on my dance knowledge, the variety of dances, not just ballet. I mean, we were doing Fosse style dancing in 2017. We were incorporating more characteristic um, theatrics, I guess you could say, going into especially 2018 and 2019 into 22, like just getting a little bit more of the human side of the performance and not just the, all right, I march from this dot to this dot, and then I play this, and maybe I step out here, maybe I lunge here, like really developing a character to the performers as well. So, really just being around those design staffs and the teachers that I work with every day in the summertime, getting to see, um, like what's the next thing, what's current in marching arts right now, and being able to bring that to my current position at Central Crossing High School, where I serve as kind of the visual caption head in a way, running the basics block, choreographing and producing some of the moments in the shows, working with the indoor percussion ensemble in the winter time, and getting to take a lot of those skills that I've learned from especially my drum corps experience and translating that into a school, scholastic and young person setting. So yeah, that's the Spark Notes version at least.
Yeah, you've had a lot of opportunities, a chance to do a lot. You get that call from Mike Fanning. Is that a surprise, or did you think that was like something that you saw for yourself?
Oh, it was definitely a surprise. I think it was about March of that 2016 spring. I was all set to go to Blue Knights again. I had done at least one of their pro satellite audition camps, was kind of on track for that. And then, out of nowhere, Mike messages me and says, "Hey, can I give you a call sometime in the next couple of days?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." Not even considering that that was a possibility. And I loved my time at Blue Knights. It was a great corps. It is a great corps. It was a great team to work with there. It was just, I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to go back home. And it also was nice to have spring training in my backyard for at least a couple years.
Right. Yeah, I think I well, I mean, we went to the same high school and we're lucky to have a lot of good teachers, but compared to some of the programs out there, like definitely kind of humble beginnings. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, so it is always interesting to see like jumping from that to doing drum corps to like having a chance to teach drum corps. It always seems like a kind of unbelievable, kind of not what you expect, but um, cool. So, kind of moving on to the heart of what I want to get your take on today. So, in a lot of music education programs, training young band directors, not a lot of time gets spent on the visual component of marching band or how to teach that. Obviously, most of the emphasis goes into being a good musician and learning how to teach music. Um, a lot of colleges, like marching band, is a class you take one semester, even though it ends up being a pretty big part of your job. And in that class, visual is only maybe a third of the curriculum, if that, of that actual class. So it just doesn't necessarily reflect how big of a role it plays for a lot of us. Um, so today, if you could kind of walk us through what we missed in college. So how to structure a visual program for young musicians, specifically in a high school setting.
Yeah. So I kind of structured it in a way of, like the big events that we've got, or the big time periods that we've got here at Central Crossing. So we actually start our marching band. Really, we start our marching band recruiting in January because that's when they start scheduling classes. But then once we've got them scheduled and got them signed up, or usually late April or early mid-May, we start some spring clinics. That's something I've done here at Central Crossing in my previous job at Watkins as well. And it's, a handful of after school clinics are, as far as our director goals for that, is not to get them, you know, performance ready. It's not to even really teach them a bunch of skills necessarily. It's just getting them connected to the program. We actually do a lot of section leader based um, part portions to rehearsal because we're really trying to build those relationships as early as possible because that's how we really get them hooked on marching band is yes, we want them to want to play music at a high level, and yes, we want them to want to be their best person in the ensemble. But usually what motivates an eighth grader, soon to be freshman, is, am I going to feel comfortable there? Am I going to know people there? Is this going to be something that I want to be around these people all the time? So we really do a lot of section leader based rehearsal to give them that opportunity to build those connections and get the leaders a chance to start kind of building their teaching program a little bit. Because we try to make a lot of our summer rehearsals have incorporate some student leadership moments in there. So getting them comfortable with that right off the bat is helpful too in our overall goals for the program. But at those clinics, it's like I said, it's just about getting an understanding of what they're about to take on. And so my main focuses are just moving with a group and moving in time. If by the end of the clinics, we usually do 3 or 4 that all we've done is just walked across the gym floor in time. That's successful. Some years I've been able to dive a little bit deeper into technique. I usually try not to get too much because it's going to be a few more weeks before they use it. So I don't want to spend extra time on something that's going to either overwhelm them or get forgotten. But the concept of timing is consistent, both playing, moving, anything they're doing in band. So we really hammer that home. But like I said, sometimes if the students are demonstrating readiness, I'll start diving a little bit more into the technique, giving them some of the basic terms. So that way, when they show up in the summertime, they have something to build on. They have some sort of vocabulary already, or at least when they hear me say it, they can go, "Oh yeah, that's that thing he said in May. Now here's what I get to see what it looks like in real context."
Right.
Then we
So
get
so
into,
so
oh sorry,
foot timing. So foot timing is like the first thing you do.
yeah, timing. Nothing matters if it's on time.
Right. So foot timing, and then you start introducing basically the vocabulary.
Yeah,
So the way you're gonna talk this. Okay.
yeah. So then when we get to it's we call it WABA Week. It's the acronym for this parade that we do. It's basically a Fourth of July parade. It's not a Fourth of July parade. It happens the last week of June. Kind of weird, but it's nice to have Fourth of July off, I guess. Um, but that still the big focus is timing. We can't, as I just said, we can't do anything if we can't do it in time. We're not gonna sound our best if we can't play to a consistent pulse in our feet. So still hammer home that timing, timing, timing. Then we start to get into some technique, and we really focus mostly on the forward marching because that's what they're going to do at the parade. That's another one of the things that if we get time, we'll do a little bit of, maybe some backwards marching or introduce some slide technique, but they're not going to use that in for another 4 weeks or so, or 3 weeks after that parade. So I don't want to, once again, I don't want to overwhelm them with information. I don't want to spend a lot of time on stuff that they're most likely going to forget most of the information. So usually just really focus on the forward technique. But then I do take that opportunity to really start getting them used to, here's how you develop a technique. Here's how we go from just moving our feet in time, walking in time, to actually marching. Because especially since we do core style technique, it's very similar to walking, but as you and I both know, there's significant differences in the definitions and the way they move. Um, so we need to both recognize that connection they're going to make to walking while also recognizing those differences that they need to be aware of as well. So I do, and this is something we actually do at Blue Coats as well. We call it the evolution of marching. And so it kind of happens in about 3 or 4 stages. So we usually do just an across the floor style technique. I love starting with across the floor, just having them go one line at a time every 8 counts or so, because they get a chance to observe other people doing what they're being asked to do and start building their own concept of what it's supposed to look like. And then we as teaching staff get a chance to zero in on some individuals or see what are some trends across the group without having to try to stretch our eyes across a full basics block. So using that across the floor, or some people call it conveyor belt exercise, is really useful, especially in the beginning, helping them kind of do some discovery learning and build their own concept of what it is. But we always start with just walking in time. Start the metronome going, and my only instructions are, right, walk from here to that yard line and start with your left foot. I'm just giving them something basic and just one little definition of just starting with the left foot. But otherwise, I'm just trying to hammer home, get your feet in time. Here's what it's like to move with this click. Here's what it's like to move with a consistent speed. And then we just build it from the ground up. The next step is just land on the back edge of your heel and roll through each step. We're starting to create a little bit more definition of technique, starting to get them more familiar with the way their lower body is going to move. And then since we use kind of a straight leg or long leg technique, we tell them then the next step is straighten the leg out. Okay, we're still relaxed upper body. We're just basically adding a layer each time that we do it, getting that leg shape, getting used to what's it like to move with a straight leg versus a kind of our typical bending knee walking style. And then the final stage is coming up to a set playing posture, and feeling what's it like to be at this very strict, very stagnant upper body posture that's it's got pretty rigid definitions to it, and still moving with the feet in time, with the legs straight, rolling through all the feet. And it's been really helpful because, like I said, it's so close to walking that, and we need to recognize that connection. With the more that we're basically teaching beginning band, but in terms it's beginning movement. And so, getting them used to, okay, you walk every day. You walk to get over here to the spot. So now just walk to there, but do it to this click. And then gradually building up. All right, now here's where it starts to differ from your walking. You're rolling through your foot, you're straightening your leg out, you're holding your upper body in this defined posture. And so trying to help their brains make that connection, or that build a bridge to what the difference is between walking and marching. And this is another opportunity for some student leadership. We'll split up sometimes where we'll have them split off into sections, and that gives us as a teaching staff a chance to just observe. We get to see what the student leaders are saying, how the members are responding to that. These new students often feel more comfortable in those smaller groups too, so they feel a little more willing to learn and willing to work on those things if they have a peer that's they're looking up to, helping them out. And then we learn this in our education classes, but the leaders don't necessarily realize it until they start doing it. But they're learning the technique just as much because they're figuring out what they're supposed to be doing by teaching it. Sometimes I think I might be a better marcher now than I was as a performer because I think about the things that I'm teaching my students and realizing I'm trying to apply those myself as well. And so that's sort of where we structure where we kind of really start digging into the technique side of things. But it all relates back to getting everything in time and then kind of working with as much prior knowledge as they have.
Right. Well, I think that's interesting because I think I would hope that there's a lot of band directors out there that will probably identify like foot timing as the most important thing. But I don't think a lot of people start with that. I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people probably start with posture, start with like set position. And it sounds like that's almost the last thing you do in your process, like that upper body that is like that fourth step. after
Hmm.
in time, get the feet right, get the legs right, and then you start really talking about posture. I think a lot of people almost probably do that backwards, or at least start with that stage four.
Yeah, and I used to do that too. It kind of came down to I realized, especially here, but even when I was still at Watkins, we didn't have that Fourth of July parade. But like, no matter what, they have to be able to do this. You know, in the terms of this Waba week, like by the end of this week, they've got to be able to march down a street and play music. You know, so it as much as I would love for them to march with perfect forward marching technique, perfect posture, and all these things, they just have to be able to move. You know, so if as much as we'd rather them not, if they're just walking but their feet are in time, then we've been successful. But if we've also kind of given them those reps and fed them that technique as well, they're going to start building on it, and everything's going to naturally um, build up as well. And I also had to kind of like expand my perspective a little bit. Is like I'm teaching them a brand new skill that they're not going to get it by the end of the week. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're not. They've said they might get most of it, but in terms of what we want them to look like, that's going to be a whole season process. So let's get them the foundation. Let's get them the building blocks. Let's get them comfortable with the big things. Because if we can get their feet in time, then it's a lot easier to then come back and say, okay, now try to land more on the back edge of your heel. Try to land more on your platform or define the technique side of it a little bit more.
Right. Right. Well, and you compare it to beginning band, and when we start beginning band, like a lot of times it's like rhythm.
Yeah,
Timing is like the first thing we do, and then the tone, like the technique, takes longer to develop. It's not that you don't talk about it, but it's the last thing to get there. Um,
yeah. I always tell people my first year teaching, my worst section was the trumpet section in sixth grade, and made me feel pretty bad as a trumpet player that like, oh, I realized I was overwhelming them with all this technique information, and half of them were still trying to figure out how to make a sound. And I had to realize like, oh, you're 12. We're trying to teach you body awareness of this. Like, so I, starting to think of like, all right, let's kind of. I always tell my students, it's like I'm giving you a concrete slab, and we're just chipping away at it. And by the end, we're gonna have a nice, beautiful sculpture. But right now, it's a slab, and we're just making making dents as we go through.
Gotcha. So when you're structuring a normal rehearsal, so you've got them kind of doing the technique, you have the structure for that. How do you implement the visual program into rehearsals as you're going through the season? Especially as like school starts, time is more limited.
Well, most times we're pretty good about, we start our rehearsals with like warm up time, basically. So like during that Wava week where we've got the rehearsals are about 3 hours, we get about 45 to minutes to an hour usually for visual or basics time. When we have full day rehearsals, it's usually pretty consistently an hour. And then once we get into the school year and after school rehearsals, it's usually about 20 minutes or so of visual time. But and Mr. or Eric has been really great about pretty consistently. Every once in a while, we cut basics from rehearsal, and that's kind of life of on the visual staff. Both in the drum corps and the marching band world, is that usually the first thing that gets cut is basics time because we gotta learn more dots. We gotta do this. We gotta do that, and um, usually I try to caution against that as much as possible, though, because it's like we need a movement warm up as much as we need a music warm up. Um, but usually in that time, like I said, we usually devote some time. And that's especially once you get into the thick of it in the season, that 15 to 20 minutes, it goes fast. You'd wish you had more, but that's kind of what you need in terms of at least the ratio of that to the what you need to be working on for the rest of rehearsal. So, using that, it's usually about a third to a fifth, probably 20 to 30% of the rehearsal time is a visual warm up, a basics warm up. And then just how we do our rehearsals depends on what our goals are. In the beginning, when we're first learning drill, we're just learning dots. So really, you almost get a 3 hour visual block because you're working on just getting them from point A to point B to point C, point A to point B to point C. And then, as the season goes on, it's a lot more full ensemble or music ensemble time, getting them as comfortable marching and playing as possible.
Right. Yeah, I think that basics time is something that a lot of groups miss out on. Especially if it's something if it's something the director isn't comfortable with, if it's something they didn't feel like they learned in college, they might not have a visual warm up the same way they feel really confident about how a band should musically warm up.
Yeah, and I've actually even like I sometimes hesitate to call it basics anymore because sometimes it really is just visual time. I especially this year I've kind of evolved in the kind of answering a question ahead of time, but um, I kind of evolved how I treat that basics time. To I started doing just exercises for exercise, kind of treating it like a music warm up of like, okay, well, we do some box drill or figure eight drill, we do some triangle drill, or every once in a while we incorporate some circle drill if we're showing needs for that in the show. Um, but I kind of realized like those are important, those are good things, but I do more of that in the summertime when we have more we're still developing those fundamentals and we're still kind of building their visual understanding because it does work those concepts that they need to work on. But I got a lot more intentional with how I treated the visual time and the basics time. And because it's sometimes we do only have 15, 20 minutes. So, just getting 10 reps on box drill might not necessarily be what your group needs at that point. So trying to identify, all right, what are some like one point in the season we were having trouble marching and playing and being comfortable, like being confident with it. So I was like, well, we just need more reps marching and playing. So we did a lot of tracking with the winds, not just percussion, but like with the winds too, of tracking portions of the show, getting used to just moving your feet and playing with your feet moving. Sometimes if there's, we were learning a bunch of new drill, but we needed to clean some stuff earlier in the show. I would take that basics time, that visual time, and use it to clean that drill that needed clean because I knew we weren't going to get that time in the normal rehearsal time because we needed to learn dots and get comfortable with those new dots and the new music. So trying to find, identify where are needs visually and incorporating that more rather than just doing exercises for exercise's sake or getting it's important to get the body warmed up, but moving just to move, things like that. So trying to be more intentional about it.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that is something that I think a lot of directors probably get a little scared away from because they don't necessarily have the expertise, or they're like, oh well, the drill doesn't look good, but I don't know why. Or they'll look at something like that where it's like, oh, they can't move and play at the same time, so like, oh, we need to practice the music more.
Yeah.
So and so they kind of go home to what they're most comfortable with, in terms of fixing that. So if you're a band director and you're still learning how to do the visual thing, maybe it's not your strong suit, what are some easy things they could start doing right now that's going to have the biggest impact?
I think one of the first things would just be think about what's the look you're going for. Because that's something that's universal, whether it's a competition core style group, whether it's a show style group, military style, everybody's got some sort of defined technique and defined look. When I was at OU in the marching 110, we had exercises that were like we were working for this leg getting all the way up, having an extended calf, a pointed toe. Like there were specific definitions. And so we had to develop exercises that helped create that look. Same thing with core style competitive marching. Like you have a look in mind. So you want to have an idea of, all right, what is that look, first of all? And then what's some terminology for that look? Vocabulary students need to know things you can use to help guide them towards that look. And then, the final step being like exercises to create that look. And that'll kind of encourage how you teach it as well. I think, for example, I kind of think of the sort of the basic level, intermediate level, advanced level, and how I teach marching technique. The basic level, I'm just worrying about hitting your feet with the beat and then keeping the heels low and the upper body or sternum lifted. I'm giving them like two spots, three things to think about. It's like feet in time, low heels, tall upper body. If you're thinking about those things, that's going to get you towards that look. And, that'll help, that it's to help reach all the students, not just the experienced marchers, not just the new marchers, but everybody, because everybody can come back to those three things: feet in time, low heels, tall upper body. If you do those things, you're going to get the look that we're going for. All right. And then as they start to seem like they're pretty masterful of that, and you're starting to scrub out those other dirty parts of the technique, then you start getting into some more specifics, like maybe at an intermediate level, you're looking at crossing feet on the and counts, flexing the foot as you cross through, thinking about not just lifting your sternum up and your upper body up, but lifting it forward towards the audience as well. Also trying to work to get the weight out of the hips. As they start seeing an understanding of getting feet in time, having the heels low and lifted upper body, you can start adding more checkpoints to think about. And then with the more advanced, whether it's more advanced students or a more advanced portion of the year, really talking about not just the feet in time, but the legs in time. Because I mean, really, that's what's in time is the legs. The feet are just reacting to what the legs are doing. But because the foot is the thing that hits with the beat, that's the thing that's freshest in the students' minds. So you really try to get them thinking about, all right, every time that click is happening, my foot's hitting. And once they show comfort with that, starting to build the idea of, all right, now get the legs moving with the right energy. Make sure the motion's happening from the upper part of the leg to help maintain a straight leg. Roll through the inside of your foot or land on the whole platform. You start giving them those more specific definitions, and isolating even further different parts of their body that they need to be aware of. So, like that still all relates back to the look that we're going for, but we're hitting the students where they're at in their development level. And then with those, developing exercises that work the most important skills. Okay, timing, timing. I've done walk across the field in time. I've done move your body in time with this, maybe like come up with some sort of dance movement that moves in time. Get used to the idea, just like jogging over there in time. Let's jog in place in time. Just a bunch of different things to keep it fresh, keep them active, and also just getting used to timing and energy. Starts and stops. Doesn't matter what type of drill you're doing, doesn't matter what type of performance you're doing. You have to be able to initiate in time. You have to be able to stop in time. So creating exercises that even if it's a simple 8s and 4s exercise, move 8, hold 4, move 8, hold 4, move 8, hold 4. That kind of thing, just getting them used to the idea of starting and stopping at different times. Working direction changes. That's, usually the first thing I teach is Donkey Kong drill, which is a forward, left, forward, left style of exercise. Just getting them used to moving in different directions, getting different facings. That's usually how I introduce lateral slides. So that way they can get a concept of here's where my upper body's supposed to be facing. And then when I take my step to the left, what do I need to do to keep my upper body facing that way? And then I started moving into box drill because that incorporates some forward to backwards direction changes. And then, whatever style you're going to do, you're going to do step size changes. I mean, the OU marching 110 is 85% of the time 8 to 5 size steps, but there are those times where we have to do a little bit larger step or a little smaller step. So getting them accustomed to those step size changes, and getting, so that's where I started incorporating like a triangle drill. It's move 12 at an 8 to 5 this way, move 12 at a 12 to 5 this way, move 12 at about a 7 to 5 this way, to get them used to those direction changes still at a little bit more higher or a little bit higher level. And then also getting accustomed to step size changes with those direction changes, because more times than not, their drill is going to be something beyond an 8 to 5, but either greater or less than an 8 to 5. But it all comes back to, having that concept of the look and what you can do to reach all of your students to get that look.
No, I think that's really helpful. And I think that is, especially if it's not something that you studied at school or had experience with, like when you were in high school, the whole marching part is it's very new to you. It probably is pretty difficult for you to like articulate, what it's supposed to look like. So I think, bringing home that vision and refining what that is for your program, which I think it's informative that like you talk about the 110, you talk about what the blue coats do and what you do at central crossing. And those, central crossing and blue coats probably have some overlap, but the 110 is so different. So it's really just, yeah, it's just having a look, whatever the look is going to be for your program. And then, keeping it simple after that to get as close to that as you can. But what would you identify as the most frequent mistakes that a lot of young or inexperienced band directors make when they're thinking about the visual side of things?
Well, one of the first things we talked about was the just the way we go about introducing it. We're trying to almost give them every single thing, and we aren't we're kind of we miss out on, or we don't spend as much time, or we lose time where we need to be spending on the most important things. Like I'll go back to that parade week. We just have by the end of the week we have to be able to march down a street. It doesn't matter whether you know, I would love to spend all this time developing the posture. I'd love to spend all this time taking one step and holding it to get them used to, right, what's the legs supposed to shape like, what's everything supposed to feel like when you take that step, and then when you slowly cross to step two. And absolutely, those things are important. Those concepts are important, but you have to prioritize your time to meet what your most immediate goals are. They by the end of that week they have to be able to march down the street. So we just got to get them moving and moving with their feet in time, and then we give them technique definitions. Or when we're when we're getting ready to start learning drill, usually we haven't we're cramming in the last bit of basics. Like I would love to dig into technique and dig into like and all this, but eventually by next week, by Monday, they're going to have to be moving forward, moving backwards, moving to the left, moving to the right with their upper bodies facing the front. So just getting them, being okay with it not being good in the beginning, being okay with that you're kind of force feeding them a lot of stuff really quickly. And then knowing that as long as over the course of the season, you're gradually shaping that technique, kind of going back to that chiseling that sculpture that I was talking about, as long as you keep that in mind, it's okay to like, you have to let go a little bit. And so just kind of prioritizing what you need to do when. I've done the hold the posture, take a step and hold it. But a lot of times that's teaching them a lot of habits that they're not quite ready for. And it's possibly even teaching them some bad habits because they're trying to compensate for things they're not quite ready for. Then kind of in that same vein, simplifying the language for visual. Um, I feel like probably because it's kind of probably the same way I teach woodwind instruments sometimes. When I'm teaching my beginning altos, I have to like check my language sometimes because I'm thinking of what was I taught as a like top level saxophone technique thing, but how can I make that translate to a sixth grader? Because I'm not a saxophone player, but I teach it. So I'm thinking back to, all right, what's the textbook definition? What's this? But that's not always going to translate to the student. Same thing with visual, because there's not always that in-depth training as there is in music. The easy way out is like, all right, what's the textbook definition? What did I read? What did I learn from my band director? That kind of thing. And so a lot of times we end up thinking too complexly. I saw somebody ask a question one time on one of the Facebook groups about how to teach backwards marching, and one of the responses was talking about the students being aware of, like, I don't even remember, some specific muscle in their leg, the way it moves. And in my head, I'm thinking, I mean, they're not wrong, but imagine telling that to a 14-year-old boy, like, like that is important information, but it's got to be understandable. So that's why I like that evolution of march. I do that for forward, I do that for backwards. I come up with things and exercises and ideas and terms that allow the students to be able to access the information. It's something that they can hear and they have an idea of what that is. Because especially like I said before, it's beginning band all over again. And then kind of another thing that you see a lot, especially on the performance side of things, is movement and visuals without intention or without instruction. The idea of moving to move. There's so many times where you see a group at a competition or a football game, and they've put in some movement things that it's because they saw a drum corps do it, or they saw a Bands of America group do it, or that they have this idea that the judges are going to be looking for that kind of thing, so we have to have that kind of thing. And I mean, those are all very relatable thoughts and mindsets. But you always have to go back to, it has to relate to the music, and sometimes it's okay to hold. But the movement, whether it's marching, whether it's dance, whether it's step outs, whether it's lunges, whatever it might be, it has to match the music and it has to enhance the music performance. So moving to move isn't always going to, it's actually might be detrimental to the performance because it's taking away, especially if you're going to a competitive event, a judge is going to look at that, and if they see that it's not really fitting, it's going to make them think even more negatively about the moment than maybe if you had just held there or if you just marched there. So just understanding that there's intention to what you're doing when. Yes, I'm all about choreographing as many things. I love producing movements. I love reducing the amount of holds as possible because I think it is really cool when groups do that and do that well. But I also recognize, if our opener ends with a unison whole note held for 8 counts, it's not really there's not really a lot of music to base a visual movement off of. So if we don't get to that by the end of the year, it's okay because it's kind of already fitting to just have a hold there. And then putting in movement, but not necessarily having clear definitions or ensuring everyone understands the definitions. And I mean, a lot of that just kind of, it goes back to that lack of comfort. It's like you recognize that this is where marching band is, this is what current groups are doing, so you want to incorporate those things. But if it's not going to be if it's not going to get performed effectively, or there's not going to be clear definitions to what they're going to be doing, it's not going to have the effect that you're hoping it will. I rarely put ground rules into shows, because one, I think it's a advanced skill. Some groups do it very well, but I think that's an advanced group skill for a lot of school groups. But two, I've started to get more vocabulary. I've started to like pay more attention when they're doing it at spring training or at audition camps, so I can kind of create my own definitions to work with. But I don't feel comfortable putting that in. So I know if I put that into a show and try to ask a student to do it, it's not going to be get as good as it should be for performance because I'm not going to be effective enough as a teacher to teach that. So, I'm always searching out for those things. But, if I'm not comfortable teaching it, I'm not going to put it in because I know I'm not setting the students up for a successful performance.
Right. And your dry cleaning bill will be through the roof.
But, oh, yeah, we're on a parking lot too, so we'd have very angry parents, I'm sure, sometimes. And then I think the last thing too is just, and we talked about this a little bit, is reducing or cutting basics time from rehearsal. I mean, I can tell you firsthand from some auditions that we've done for Bluecoats that we've had students that get monster music scores, but then their visual scores aren't great. And the brass staff starts. They're like, "Hey, this person was pretty good." And we're like, "Yeah, but you're not going to get that person when they're marching. When they're standing still, yeah, you're going to get that player. You're going to be thrilled with that player. But the second they take a step, it's going to dip." And so it's the same with your high school students. They got to be comfortable with moving. They've got to be comfortable with moving and playing because they're never going to sound as good on the move as they do standing still. And you want to bridge that gap as much as you can. You don't want it to make, you want to make a slight difference between the two to as close to the same as possible. But, you got to get them moving, and whatever you're doing in that basics time or that visual time is all towards getting them to sound as good moving as when they're standing still.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that is good advice for some people that are still kind of working through those kinks. Final question for anyone that wants to learn more about the visual side of things. What resources are available and where should they be looking?
I mean, first of all, internet, where our students are using it all the time. I've had students learn songs based off a YouTube video as sixth graders. Like, if we were to put that music in front of them, they couldn't do that. But, when it comes to them getting a chance to, when they seek it out, when they know what they want to look for, they find all kinds of resources. There's the same thing for teachers. There's YouTube videos of just performances of groups. You can kind of gives you an idea of what are the things that are current in marching band and drum corps. What are they doing? When are they putting those kinds of things in? How are they using them? What's going on musically? Like, you get to see it in context. But also there's a lot of teaching resources there too. I've actually been directed to a couple of times a YouTube channel called Miss Ati, and she's a ballet instructor that she's got everything from like the very basic just positions to advanced dance and ballet techniques. And that's helped me a lot in getting comfortable with teaching a lot of those more advanced techniques. And she breaks like all the videos are anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes long. Some are a little bit longer, but it's, she breaks everything down from a fundamental standpoint, and does a lot of modeling. So you can actually like see it and work to match that. I know some like marching health has come onto the scene a lot more, being incorporated with drum corps a lot more. And I've been noticing on their social media, they're actually even posting some how to do how to teach marching kind of videos. Like how to look at it not just from the look perspective, but also the considering students' health while they're marching, and considering the ways they can move their bodies in ways that are going to help create that look, but also not hurt themselves in the process. I think there's another account like a Forte Music Academy or something like that that I've seen pop up sometimes as well, where they do a similar kind of thing, like how to teach backwards march, how to teach slides. And so, the internet is probably one of the best, most accessible resources we've got, as long as we know what to look for. Um, and then I would also say, take some time to take a dance class. I've actually taken a couple of beginning ballet classes in Columbus. And, some of the stuff I knew from my marching band experience and my drum corps experience, but some of it I either had not learned before or had not learned in that way. And so it gave, putting me back as a student and thinking, all right, here's the way they're presenting the information to me. Because I think that's important as a director, as well as I think we need to put ourselves back in the students' shoes every chance we get, because that's going to help us as teachers. If we're hearing something that's going on in a rehearsal, that it's being communicated in a way in a rehearsal that's not making sense to us, it's definitely not going to be making sense to our students. So getting that opportunity to take a dance class and get more formal instruction in movement, because the dance stuff's going to help the marching as well. It creates body awareness, it creates movement ideas and habits that students might not have otherwise gotten. So, creating a dance warm up of some sort is actually really helpful to any marching band, because it gets them moving in time, gets them doing different movements, it increases body awareness. And so, students get that opportunity to build that technique even better away from marching. And so, regardless of whether you're going to incorporate it into your show, it's going to help you as a teacher and help you with your students to use those skills. And a lot of times they can be pretty cheap. I think the one I've gone to is just happens once a week. You drop in when you can. Sometimes they've moved on to more advanced concepts. Sometimes they're at very basic levels. They kind of go in a rotation, but they make sure everybody's on the same page. There's some programs around here that have like a 6 week, $60 program, where you get to go through a full kind of cycle of classes. Like there's a number of resources and a number of opportunities. And I think there's nothing beats doing it as much as possible, because that's how you're going to learn. Anytime before I give feedback to students, I'm going through the exercise to try to remind, all right, what am I noticing? What do I need to do to correct that? So, being able to do those concepts is also going to help be able to teach those concepts too.
I know. I think that's good advice. There's definitely sometimes it feels like there's no resources out there, but I think more and more there are actually quite a few, especially if you're kind of thinking outside the box, like taking dance classes or looking at those like different but related, fields of movement. Um,
Yeah.
well, Phil, thank you for taking the time to talk, answering some questions, and kind of sharing your expertise on this visual side of things we don't get to talk about too much.
Yeah, no, of course. Glad to help any way I can.